But first, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly is trying to deliver a message to her American counterpart that Canada is prepared to stand up for its national interests ahead of a major summit next week. The leaders of Canada, the U.S., and Mexico will sit down for trilateral talks on Thursday. It is the first summit of its kind since 2016. COVID-19, climate change, trade, and migration are all on the agenda. Both Canada and Mexico have plans to raise their concerns about U.S. protectionism and how it could hurt the auto industry. Juan José Gómez Camacho is Mexico's ambassador to Canada. Ambassador, thank you so much for speaking with us today. This is the first summit of its kind in about 5 years now. From your perspective, how important is this summit in Washington next week?
Well, first, Katie, thank you for having me here.
Welcome.
It's a real pleasure. It's very important. It's very important, first, as you said, it's the first one after 5 years that was suspended. Second, because it shows and confirmed the fact that the three leaders, President Biden, Prime Minister Trudeau, and President López Obrador, have a North American commitment, and they understand and they want more North America, more integrated and more cooperation amongst ourselves. So it's very important, and we are very happy and optimistic.
Now, one thing that is a huge priority for Canada going into this summit is the big concern and the big push to get the Biden administration to either change or drop entirely this proposed tax credit program for electric vehicles. Canada is very concerned it could hurt jobs in this country, given the way that the supply chain works, as well as it could encourage more companies to actually build production facilities in the United States. Does Mexico share that same concern?
We do. We have been very explicit about it. Now, I should say that during the summit, we are focusing still in discussion, but the three countries are focusing, I would say, three major topics or issues. Number one is the pandemic, COVID-19, and health security for North America, and what implies to make sure that we get it. Number two, competitiveness. And equitable growth, that no one is left behind. How can we make sure that we grow in a sustainable way? How can we become more competitive as a region? How can we address supply chain challenges, and so on and so forth? And for Mexico, also very important, the justice element, justice in the sense of inclusivity and good distribution. Number three, immigration. Immigration, as you know, is a major challenge for the region. It's not only a Mexican challenge or a U.S. challenge, it's a really broader challenge, so it will be there. But back to your original point, absolutely we are concerned. Absolutely we think is a wrong measure, that it's against NAFTA, and we are seriously in talks with the U.S. and Canada on the subject.
So if the Biden administration doesn't make any changes and goes ahead and passes this bill and the tax credit goes ahead as planned, will you bring forward any sort of trade challenge? What is Mexico's plan?
Well, we will see. Let's wait before to see what happens. And this is something we're coordinating with Canada, but probably as a context, there is another subject that has to do with regional content, for example. And the way we see these things, first of all, we don't see them politically. They are technical differences. They are technical subjects where we, the three countries, have important differences. And we launched on the other one a formal NAFTA consultation process. So we are ready to do what is necessary, but we are very much in talks and cooperation with the U.S. and Canada on them. So we'll see. Let's see where it leads. These things. These take time and are very complex technically, and the political process in the U.S. is still in the making.
It is still in the making. Tell me a little bit about your conversations with Canada specifically on this issue of the proposed tax credit. What are those conversations like?
Well, basically that we agree on the challenge that is against NAFTA or CUSMA, this new version, and that we are passing along our concerns or talking to the U.S. About these concerns. We have even presented formal letters explaining our position. And as you know, it's not only Canada and Mexico. European countries and other countries have done the same. So the message to the U.S. is very, very strong.
And so who has sort of been your main point of contact on this? And when the leaders get in a room together in Washington next week, do you see, your president and the Canadian Prime Minister sort of teaming up against Joe Biden to sort of say, hey, this is not a go for us? How is that going to happen?
Well, first, there will be a bilateral. There will be 3 bilaterals. Mm-hmm. And one, of course, between Prime Minister Trudeau and President López Obrador, where they will talk fundamentally of the bilateral relationship and how we can have a stronger relation within the North American context. I don't know if they will go to these specifics or that much, but it's going to be about prosperity, cooperation, and for sure they will talk about the U.S. Of course, they are not teaming up against the U.S. President López Obrador comes with a very cooperation-oriented agenda for the conversation. And the 3 issues I mentioned to you, you can see that they are very structural, mm-hmm. very broad, very important for the future prosperity of the region, and that's the way they are going to approach it. Specific issues like electric vehicles or regional content, Minister Eng, Secretary Cloutier in Mexico, and the U.S. Trade Representative in the U.S., I can assure you, are talking very often.
One thing that I'm very curious about from your perspective, from the Canadian perspective, what we're hearing from leaders here is that while there are some irritants in the Canada-U.S. relationship, which there typically always are, there seems to be more of a sense of predictability when it comes to the new occupant of the White House with President Joe Biden. I'm curious from the Mexican perspective, how do you approach the Biden administration after the difficult years with the Trump administration? What is it like to compare the difference?
I wouldn't make comparisons. What I can tell you is that the dialogue and the closeness between the U.S. administration, President Biden, and the López Obrador administration in Mexico is very strong. As you probably are aware, a few months ago, Vice President Kamala Harris was down in Mexico City. Mm-hmm. After her, our foreign minister led a big delegation to the White House to discuss different issues, not only migration, but security, economic development, growth, Central America, Latin America, and so on and so forth. Then National Security Advisor has been at least 2 times in Mexico City. Secretary of State Blinken led a big delegation mm-hmm. To Mexico City. With him was Secretary Mayorkas and the Attorney General. They relaunched a security scheme, very important between the 2 countries. And most importantly, they relaunched the high-level economic dialogue between Mexico and the U.S. So to answer your question, it was very active, very positive, very constructive, and again, in a very cooperative manner. So we don't make comparisons. We just are having a very important, strong relation with the U.S.
Now, this happened under the previous Mexican government during the NAFTA negotiations. There was some tension in the Canada-Mexico relationship near the end of the negotiations of NAFTA. Mexico, of course, reached an agreement with the United States with the Trump administration before Canada did, and some Canadian officials had some very firm words. I understand Chrystia Freeland, who was then the Foreign Affairs Minister, as well as some Canadian MPs as well, felt that Mexico had thrown Canada under the bus during these negotiations. And that's a quote from an MP. That's not just me using colorful language. How would you say, have the tensions from that time, I know there's been a change in government, have the tensions from that time eased in the Canada-Mexican relationship?
Let me tell you something, and I'm telling you the truth. It's quite a myth, this thing that there were tensions between the 2 governments, that Mexico talked to the U.S. without the Canadians and so on and so forth. Not at all. We did never do anything on the back of Canada. Something different is that within CUSMA negotiations, there are or there were issues properly Canadian American and properly Mexican American. But this said, the dialogue, the coordination between Canada and Mexico was always very strong. Now, these things are complex technically.
I covered that at the time, and I remember the Canadian delegation was incredibly, they didn't expect what had happened to happen. They felt blindsided, and they were quite upset about it. And I'm just curious, was there, the tensions from that time, are they gone?
I can tell you that we never felt them. And we did everything we could to maintain transparency and openness with our Canadian friends. Whether they were differences of views or disagreements between Mexico and Canada, probably. This was an extraordinarily complex negotiation, and these things are expected. This, technically speaking, is very difficult. No?
My last question, we are run out of time, but I'm just curious,
Please.
what do you, just give me your prediction for next week. Are you looking forward to doing something in person with your North American counterparts again?
It's going to be a very successful meeting, you will see. Very important, that is the first summit in presence. It's the first time Prime Minister Trudeau and President López Obrador will actually see each other in reality, not virtually. And the three issues I mentioned and others that may come up, I think are going to be very powerful. So we will hear very strong trilateral regional North American messages that I think are going to be very welcome by all.
Ambassador, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for coming in studio.
Okay, it is a pleasure as always. Thank you so much.
Thanks.